Hello, this is Joyce Chow for MBN and News Video Well. We are here coming to you from the SEMA press room, and we're here with author Norm DeWitt. Okay, I have to admit, I have known Norm before today.
Extensively before today, sadly for her.
And I've been talking to Norm as he's been talking about this book he's been writing, and so it finally came out. Grand Prix Motorcycle Racers, the American Heroes. And this was Motor Books, and this is something, no more, other than Motor Books is the publisher for this industry. What an honor.
Yeah, perhaps. What was really an honor for me was getting to tell the story of the American World Champions, because apparently there hadn't been a book written like this about the Americans that had gone on to go over to Europe, and they were all dirt track racers by and large, and we would occasionally do a road race. And they eventually, Kenny Roberts actually lost his sponsorship running flat track with Yamaha, and he was heartbroken. And they said that they put together a program for him to do road racing in Europe. Between Goodyear threw in some money and Yamaha threw in some money. We went to Europe and they won the world championship.
Yeah, so part of it is, Norm, this is the first book in Norm's Federal history. Now they could have gone to a lot of different authors, right? But they came to you because didn't you know most of these authors even before you wrote this book?
I've been writing for various magazines for years. In particular, Classic Racer in England, I've been writing for many years. And I'd done stories with a lot of the American world champions and a lot of the American near world champions.
Right.
And apparently the word was filtered back to Motor Books through a friend of mine named Don Emdy, who they had asked if he was interested in writing the book, and he said, no, but the guy you should have write it would be Norm. And so they came to me, and initially they just wanted to be on the 7 world champions, 500cc Premier Class world champions. And I thought, you got to tell the story. What about Randy Mammal? He finished 4th in the world championship, 2nd in the world championship 4 times.
4 times?
Yeah, how can you not include him in a story about the American heroes of motorcycle racing? So it turned into an expanded 10-chapter book with a chapter on the World Superbike Champions and a chapter on the contenders, the guys that didn't quite make it, but had phenomenal careers, and then a chapter on the pioneers, the guys that went over there early on in the 70s, and like Pat Hennon, who was the first American to win a Grand Prix. Most people don't even know his name, and it's really sad. Pat is one of the greatest talents. He was giving Kenny an absolute run for his money in 1978, and then he got a terrible head injury at the Isle of Man in the Isle of Man TT motorcycle race. He'd just broken the track record and had an accident that ended his career. But Pat was every bit a contender as Kenny in that first year when Kenny came over, and Kenny Roberts ended up being the world champion, but it could just as easily have been Pat.
I tell you, Norm knows the history, because you've known these guys actually for years before this point.
Yes.
You kind of know some of these background stories that maybe some people don't know enough about.
Actually, when they asked me to write the book, I called up a few of them. I called up Kenny Roberts, and I said, well, Kenny...
Can we put this in print?
Yeah, you know Kenny Roberts, do you? And I said, Kenny, I just wanted to talk to you about writing this book. And he goes, what the hell are you calling me for? And I said, well, I don't know what the protocol is on writing a book. We do articles together all the time, but not a book. There's a few things in there that are relatively shocking, things I found out along the way.
While you're writing it?
While I was writing it. Things that had not been necessarily known.
Can you share a teaser?
Well, sure.
Okay, the rest you're going to have to buy the book, but just a little bit of a teaser.
Okay, well, let's take in the Eddie Lawson chapter. Eddie Lawson was a 4-time American world champion. He was the most successful. He won more Grand Prix than anyone, and he was a 4-time champion. Nobody else won more than 3. So Lawson had been injured a lot in 1990 at Yamaha, and they were moving up John Kosinski to the full-on 500 Grand Prix team, so Eddie was going to leave. He went to Kajiva, and apparently Kenny Roberts talked to Yamaha and said, look, we need to help these guys out. They're not competitive. They took a full-spec Grand Prix Yamaha, Wayne Rainey's bike, that won the World Championship that year, and sent it with a mechanic to Kajiva in Italy and said, here, go ahead and copy it.
Really?
And Eddie Lawson confirmed to me that he was there when it arrived.
Oh my God.
And they took it completely apart and measured and did everything else. And I guess they copied the chassis just about down to the gnat's ass. But they didn't quite copy the engine. and it's not really in the book, but Eddie Lawson was less than pleased that they didn't build a Yamaha engine because the Cajiva was a boat anchor in comparison to the lighter weight Yamaha. So, and I was just looking. I was sitting in Kenny's motorhome as he's telling me the story, because at this point Kenny Roberts was running Roberts Yamaha. He was the factory Yamaha team. He was in charge of it, and I said, "Excuse me, what did you just tell me? Did you tell me you gave the competition a full spec?" And apparently it was with the Yamaha's blessing.
Did he ever have any regrets about doing something like that, or was this like a weak moment for him?
No, this was Cajiva. There was not a lot of teams, not a lot of manufacturers in the World Championship at that point. And I think it was an act of great. It was a great gesture on the part of Yamaha to permit their current spec Grand Prix bike to be handed over to
10 years earlier.
Yeah, to be handed over to the competition, so that they would stay in the game.
Okay, they're taking one for the team.
Yamaha took one for the team.
For the industry.
With a capital T, absolutely. Yeah, so
that's pretty. Yeah.
So that's just a tidbit of just maybe part of one page of this book. And
what's one of your favorite chapters everybody should read?
Well, probably the most dramatic chapter is the Wayne Rainey's chapter, because Wayne was the one who ended up in a wheelchair from a racing accident when he was leading the World Championship and going for his fourth straight championship when he was injured in Misano. And it's, I titled the chapter "No Surrender," because Wayne came back from these horrible. I mean, by all means, he should have been dead. There's details in there on what he went through. Frank Williams, the Formula One team owner, has also similarly lost the use of his legs. He was in a wheelchair, and Frank Williams flew out to Los Angeles to visit Wayne in intensive care to try to help him come to grips with what had happened, and that where his life might be headed, and how to maybe help him cope with it, being as Frank Williams is one of the great Formula One team owners in history. And so Wayne kind of took that as an inspiration, and the next year had his own 250 Grand Prix team that he was running. And so, he's just an incredible example of getting on with it through the most unimaginable adversity.
So after speaking with all of these different American heroes that are cyclists, who's your personal favorite? Just because of personality, experience, depth of character?
I hadn't really thought about it that way. It's, to a certain extent, you hear people say, well, who's your favorite child? I never really thought about who's my favorite, because some of these people I really consider to be my personal friends.
That's right. Maybe that's too tough of a question.
It is tough, but as far as the one maybe that stands out above all, would have to be Kenny Roberts, which is why he's on the cover. That's Kenny in the #1 Bumblebee Yamaha from back in the 70s, because he's the guy that went over there, won the championship 3 years in a row in his first 3 years there, almost won it again in '83, and then started his own Grand Prix team. And he was involved as either a rider or an owner of a Grand Prix team for 30 years.
That's a lot. He just loves it.
Yeah, all three of Wayne Rainey's World Championships were riding Roberts Yamahas. So not only as a rider, and he was a two-time American flat track, the national champion here in America before he ever went over to Europe. So I think if you had to pick one person whose achievements have just been off the scale, it would have to be Kenny Roberts, because he's been so successful at every level.
So I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but if you were to own any of these motorcycles, for any of these American heroes that are in your book, which motorcycle would you love to own? You didn't have to pay for it. And you could just maintain it historically, you didn't have to worry about any of that. You would just love because of the history, or you just love the bike?
Well, probably the one that sums up Americans in motorcycle Grand Prix racing more than any other one would be a #1 Bumblebee Yamaha by Kenny Roberts. And yeah, like that one. Kenny has the early 1980 bike with the alloy frame in his house at his ranch up near Modesto.
Really?
And I was out at his ranch back in February and took some pictures of him. As a matter of fact, it was in the cover of Classic Racer a few months ago with his personal collection of bikes, and that's his favorite from his Grand Prix racing years. And who am I to argue with Kenny Roberts when he says this was the bike? Well, then that would have to be the
bike.
Yeah.
I could just imagine when you first saw it, were you just like staring at it in awe and like taking pictures for?
You haven't been to Kenny's ranch.
No, I haven't.
He's got this upstairs room that is just like the history of Kenny Roberts in Grand Prix racing. There's almost every bike that he ever had or raced. He's kept all. There's all the KR Grand Prix bikes. There's all of his sons. Because his son was the 2000 world champion. Kenny Roberts Jr., and he has the bike, leathers, and gloves, and everything. The moment they crossed the finish line to win the World Championship, all that stuff went into a glass case at the Roberts Ranch.
Well, I have a feeling that there's going to be a Kenny Roberts museum later.
I really don't know, but Kenny is actually talking about breaking up the collection.
What?
Yeah, he's actually talking about putting things up for sale, up for auction. He took me around, and there's just such an incredible volume of things.
Well, it takes a lot of space, too.
Take a Grand Prix team from England, move it to the United States, and put it all at your ranch. He's got container after container load of various, carbon tanks, carbon swing arms.
His home could be a museum.
His home is a museum. It really is, for all intents and purposes. The toilet paper, the roll paper holder in the bathroom is a crankshaft out of one of his V5 Grand Prix bikes. That's what holds the toilet paper, the roll of toilet paper.
Oh my God.
As they say, it's a throne fit for a king, and they call him King Kenny.
See, that is not. See what you have in store for you.
I think one of my favorite stories in the book is Pat Hennon. And he was a kid up in the Bay Area, really didn't have much in the way of means. He was working with Ron Grant, building Grand Prix bikes that they were racing here in the U.S. And he got invited over to race in New Zealand. He did pretty well and picked up, he got noticed by Rod Coleman, who was the importer for Suzuki over in New Zealand. So Rod just happened to be at American Suzuki when they were closing down the shop and selling off all the race bikes. And he called up Pat and said, get down here with a van, and we're going to load all this stuff up, put a bike together, and bring it to New Zealand. And Pat went there and won everything. And then he said, well, I'd like to do Daytona. So they sent the bike to Daytona. The first Suzuki to ever finish on the podium in the Daytona 200. And then he's like, well, I'd really like to go to Europe and race Grand Prix. And so Rod Coleman, his benefactor, got a full Grand Prix spec Suzuki ordered and delivered to England. And so these guys have this van, and they're bouncing around to the Grand Prix, bumming parts and whatever they can. And they get to Spa, and there's a Mattel toy engineer who's there on holiday, but he was wearing a Long Beach State t-shirt. And they said, oh, we could use an extra hand on the team. So that became an official team member. And they went to the Grand Prix of Finland, and they won. The first American to win a Grand Prix.
That's pretty cool.
The first American to win a Grand Prix in the premier class. They didn't even have a recording of the American national anthem.
Oh my, they never expected that.
It was completely unexpected. And so when they got back to the paddock, one of the Japanese riders, who considered himself to be kind of a rock star, got up in front of their pit and sang the Star Spangled Banner, belted it out the best he could in his Japanese accent, because they all felt bad that he didn't get to hear the American national anthem having won a Grand Prix.
That's really pretty cool. Oh man, it's like you can hear all the stories that are coming out of this book. Norm, if people would want to buy the book, where's the best place to go to Motorbooks?
You can get it at motorbooks.com, you can get it at amazon.com, you can get it at Barnes & Noble, you can get it at Borders. It's pretty much universally available, and it makes a wonderful
Thank you very much.
Joyce, thank you as always. It's always a pleasure. And from Massage Central at SEMA 2010, we bid you a kind adieu.